Salutations, my friends! Welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. Okay, salutations sounds a little weird. Anyways, where you guys get to hear stories about people getting what they deserve. Guys, I've got 3 awesome revenge stories in this one. You'll hear about a horrible mother, a false accusation, and then we'll lighten things up with the last story about how a community gets together to drive out a neighbor. I hope you guys stay for these 3 lovely stories today. At least I hope they're lovely, and subscribe for future videos. Let's get into it. This first story is titled, Mother. My mother was a horrible person. As an example, she once told me that my father was gonna die after he'd had a heart attack, when she'd already found out from the doctor that he was gonna be okay. I was 8 years old at the time, and it was simply done as a punishment to make me cry. In her later years, she had CODP, which is a disease that restricts your breathing. My sister and I, who both hated her and had good reason to, had to nurse her for 9 years until she died. In these years, she did her best to cause trouble for as many people as possible, but mostly the 2 of us. Fortunately for us, we'd worked out the ways she'd try and would often be able to head her off at the pass. We had a deal between us that if she went too far, the offended party could take a break from looking after her, and the other would pick up the slack for a few weeks until the air cleared a bit. In 2008, she really offended my sister's youngest daughter, so my sister took a break. My mother then pulled a usual stunt she'd been doing when she felt she wasn't getting enough attention. She starved herself until she was so ill that she needed hospitalization. I got a phone call from my sister one morning telling me our mother had phoned her and was so very ill, and she wanted my sister to come over and wait with her for the doctor to come. In other words, she wanted attention. My sister asked me to do it, so I did, but I decided to take a book and read it while I was there. It was a very apt book that I'd picked up simply to get revenge on her, as I knew she'd be too nosy not to ask what it was about. It was a hardback book. The title, written very boldly on the cover, said, "When a Child Kills." It's a book about children who were treated terribly by their parents. I sat and read it for 3 hours beside her sickbed until the doctor arrived. After she saw the title, she barely said a word the whole time. The doctor arrived and told her she wasn't ill enough for the hospital. Amazingly, within a couple of days, she was a lot better, and she didn't pull that stunt again for about a year. In 2010, I was having a break from her, and she did the same thing to try to get my attention. This time, she went too far, ended up with kidney failure, and died. While registering her death, the official asked if we needed any extra copies of her death certificates, and I said, "Only if you have a framing service." That was stone cold the way OP said that. "Oh, do you want any extra death certificates?" "Yeah, only if you have a framing service." This next story is titled, "And This Is Why You Never Threaten Someone Permanently Stuck in Survival Mode." So, regarding the survival mode thing, years ago, I was living with a couple of friends and lost both my job and a place to live within the same 24 hours when the economy collapsed and the bank foreclosed on the owner where we were staying. I had about 2 weeks to get out, and I ended up homeless and living in my car for 2 years. That's another story entirely. The point, however, is when I was living in a large city in a vehicle, survival mode kicked in constantly. You're always worried, you're always cautious, and in the event that something happens that's a threat, you usually think of the most effective, brutal, and quickest way to remove it as a threat. As a result, even years later now that I'm stable, I really don't have the ability to gauge an appropriate response to a threat. Maybe that's why I went overboard here, but I'll share the story and let others be amused, or pass judgment as the case may be. When I was living in my car, I developed a relationship with someone who was a bit more stable than I was. She didn't really care that I lived in a car, as I was always presentable and was able to hold down temporary work. Nobody really knew why I lived in a car unless I shared that info with them. She was big on helping people and was genuinely a good person, or so I thought at the time. We had a falling out and just gradually lost contact. Our relationship was more of a passion thing. We remained friends on Facebook, and she was fairly popular on there with about 500 friends. This is important later. About a year after the two of us broke up, and about 6 months after I'd last spoken to her, I was doing much better. I had just started a new job that I was about to go to training for, and afterwards would be out of the car and into a more permanent residence. I had done a lot of work towards this point, and things were great. I was at a Kinko's using their internet on my laptop, and the phone rang. It was her. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, she gets to the point. Her current boyfriend got her pregnant and left her, and she needed someone to take her to the abortion clinic. And since she was the poster child perfect girl to her circle of friends and family, she couldn't ask any of them to do it, so she was asking me. On one hand, I was perturbed that this was the first time we'd spoken in a long time, and this was the only subject she felt was important enough to call me on. On the other, I try to be a good guy, and even though it backfires, I was raised that way. But in this situation, I really couldn't help her because I was supposed to drop my car off at a friend's house the next day, and then hop on a bus to another state to my orientation and new job. Even if I wanted to, which I really didn't, I couldn't. I told her as much, and that's when things took a turn for the worst. She started screaming at me on the phone, acting hysterical, crying, telling me that I was a horrible person, that I had to help her, that I didn't care about her, etc. By this point, the other people in the computer area are hearing her scream at me over the phone, and I'm getting quite a few stares. I tell her in a tense voice that I had to get off the phone and for her to send me a message. Now, some of you may be getting ahead of me here and see where this is going and think in advance that I'm an ass, but please, reserve the judgment, I promise it's worth it. My Facebook chat window starts lighting up with more insults. I realize that this might bite me in the ass and start to steer the conversation asking her details, and she gets dragged along. I confirm in the chat that she's pregnant. I confirm in the chat that he ran out on her. I asked why he ran out on her as I thought the two of them were close, and she tells me that there's a chance that it wasn't his. I tell her that once again, I can't help her as I need to catch a bus tomorrow morning. Up to this point, I'm willing to wish her luck and let it go as I start a new life tomorrow. She then drops a bombshell on me, and she says, if you don't help me with this, I'm gonna tell everybody that it's yours and that you forced yourself on helpless little me and took me against my will. Oh, hell no. She did not just say that. And then I realized that she said it over Facebook chat. Instead of warning her, instead of telling her that she's a psycho bitch, I instead start thinking about what a false accusation like this would do to me on the eve of everything that's about to change for my life. I have one thought. Born out of the survival mode that got kicked into high gear, I wanted to destroy this bitch, and I knew how to do it. I ask her if she's serious when she knows there's no way the kid's mine. She says she doesn't care. I ask her who she thinks is gonna believe her, and she says, it's my word against yours, and who are people gonna believe? You? Some homeless lowlife who lives in your car? Or me? Knowing I now have enough ammo, I pretend to reluctantly relent. I tell her, oh, damn it, fine, I'll help you. But I can't take you to the clinic tomorrow. I'll have to do it later this week. I have to change plans, but let me call you tomorrow. And she agrees. I then get to work. Within a few minutes, the chat transcript has been sent to about 100 people on her friends list, and I tagged all of our mutual friends. The chat was also linked on her church page, and I went onto her employer's page and posted the screenshots as well. And yeah, I also sent it to her parents for good measure as an afterthought. Almost instantly, my phone starts to blow up. I shut off my laptop, shut off my phone, and went out to my car to spend my last night in it. There's not much I can say about the fallout that'll do it justice, more than what's probably playing in your heads. Sides were chosen, legal threats were made, firings happened, death threats were thrown around. Needless to say, her reputation was completely ruined to the point that she not only had to delete all forms of social media, but she had to move clear across the country to get rid of the stigma from the small town she grew up in. Was this over the top? Maybe, but it was so sweet. It warms my heart on cold winter nights. All I want to say is that OP got super lucky that this was over Facebook chat, where the chat logs are saved, rather than over the phone in a conversation. A false accusation like that could potentially ruin his life. Like if she was willing to say something that severe over not getting a ride to a medical clinic, Imagine what she would do in other situations. This last story's titled, There Goes the Neighborhood. When I was young, high school age, I lived with my family in a middle upper class suburb. Everybody in the community got along for the most part, and life was quiet, peaceful, and enjoyable. That is, of course, for one major exception of the house next to mine, which is rented by Mr. Public Nuisance. Be it drug and alcohol-fueled parties, drug bust, and constant eviction notices, there was rarely more than a week that went by without some sort of police involvement. To put him into perspective, he would have failed to get a job being a dirtbag simply because he was overqualified. One fateful night, however, the neighborhood got even. It was about 11 p.m. on a spring night. Myself and my family are attempting to sleep. However, the party bumping on the other side of the fence is making sleep or even clear thought all but impossible. The police had already been called, volumes had been turned down, and then turned back up as soon as the police car had pulled around the corner. I crawled out of bed and made my way out to the living room. The front door was open, and my father was standing out front in a conference with the neighborhood pajama committee. They dispersed, and my father came back inside. I asked him what was happening, and he said, "Just be quiet and follow me." I followed my father out of the house into the backyard, where he opened up the valves for our 2 hoses. They bulged under the pressure. He handed me one of the nozzles and whispered, "On my command." We both walked over to the fence and took aim. My father waited, checking his watch until finally, his arm dropped. Streams of water appeared from all around and jetted into Public Nuisance's yard, completely drenching everybody that was in the yard. Sounds of drunk, loud partying turned into screams of shock. Now would probably be a good time to note that the neighborhood water supply was winter runoff, which usually sat above freezing temperatures. In the cool spring air, it was probably quite uncomfortable. Screams of shock were eventually overpowered by yells of rage, and Public Nuisance had lost it and was screaming half-slurred expletives. We shut the water off, and somebody yelled back, "Sorry, I thought that was the dog." A few minutes later, the neighborhood pajama committee had recommuned and were giggling amongst each other. Public Nuisance was standing in the nude in front of his house, continuing to yell at the top of his lungs. At that moment, a police car pulled around the corner. Long story short, Public Nuisance was taken to a jail on charges of providing alcohol to minors who happened to be at his party, and indecent exposure and lewd acts around girls under the age of 18, and a slew of alcohol and drug charges. He pled guilty to many of the charges and evaded jail time. However, because he now had a criminal record relating to minors, he was forced to move away from our community and the many schools that were nearby. That's one amazing way to get rid of a neighbor. I can imagine all the houses around just shooting water into the backyards, and all the drunk people thinking it was raining. Guys, and that's it for today's episode of r/ProRevenge. I hope you guys enjoyed the 3 stories in this one. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up. If you aren't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future stories. See you guys in the next one.